You looked at me for 3 years and saw nothing. You should have asked who I was.
Picture a glass conference room in Scottsdale, the kind with a view of the mountains that costs more than most people make in a year. My daughter-in-law is sitting across the table from me, the same woman who called me the help, the same woman who told her sister I couldn't tell red wine from dish soap. And right now, her hands are shaking, because between us on that table is a single folder that can either send her to prison or save her life. And I am the only person in the world who gets to decide which one. I slide it across to her real slow, and I say 4 little words. I read your books. My name is Adeline Holloway. Everybody calls me Addie. I am 67 years old, and for 3 years the people I loved most treated me like a piece of furniture that knew how to cook. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. Let me take you back, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how a woman like me ended up invisible in a house full of her own family. 3 years and 4 months ago, I buried my husband, Walt, pancreatic cancer. It moved so fast I barely had time to memorize the sound of his voice before it was gone. 51 years of marriage, and the doctors gave us 11 weeks. After the funeral, I went home to our little ranch house in Mesa, and that silence nearly finished me. You don't know what loud is until you've heard an empty house. At 3 in the morning, the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking in the hallway, and nobody in the bed beside you. I'd reach over in my sleep and find cold sheets, and every single morning I'd remember all over again. So when Garrett showed up, I was a soft target. I want to be honest about that. Grief makes you foolish, and loneliness makes you generous, and I was both. Garrett is my son, my only baby. He came over with Sloan on his arm, and that smile he's had since he was 4 years old, the one he uses when he wants something and doesn't want you to notice he's asking. We sat at my kitchen table, and he held my hand, and he said, "Mom, you shouldn't be out here all alone." And Sloan, my daughter-in-law, she leaned in with those big sympathetic eyes, and she said, "Addie, come live with us. Be part of something again. The children need their grandmother." Then came the real pitch. Sloan had a business, Lumiere Aesthetics, a med spa, the fancy kind with the recessed lighting and the eucalyptus towels, and the women paying $400 a visit to look 5 years younger. She had 1 location doing well, and she wanted to build an empire. 3 locations, then 5, then a brand. She talked fast, the way she always does, hands moving, this energy coming off her like heat off a parking lot. And she needed capital. She needed somebody to co-sign the expansion loans, somebody with good credit and a clean name. She needed a little startup cash to bridge the gap, and there I was. A widow sitting on the sale of a paid-off house and Walt's life insurance and a pension from 40 years of work. Lonely as a lighthouse, I sold the Mesa house. $210,000. I co-signed 3 loans for the build-out. I wrote a personal note for $60,000 more on top of that. And I moved into their place in a gated community up in North Scottsdale, 3 bedrooms, a pool, the whole 9 yards. I told myself I was investing in my son's future. I told myself I was buying my way back into a family. What I was actually buying, it turned out, was a job, unpaid, no days off, no thank you. The first couple of months were all right, I'll give them that, but it curdled quick. By spring, I had a routine, and the routine was this. Up at 5. Coffee on, the way Garrett likes it. Dark with a little cinnamon, the same way Walt used to take it. Although nobody ever noticed that detail, and it broke my heart a little every morning. Breakfast for the children. Toby was 7 then, he's 10 now, my serious little Miss Man. Junie was a baby still, my Junie, all curls and opinions. I'd get them dressed, pack the lunches, do the hair, the whole production. Sloan would come flying down the stairs at 7:30 in some $200 workout jet, never sweated in, smelling like a perfume counter. And she would walk right past me like I was a coat rack. Not a good morning, not a thank you, nothing. And here is the thing that took me the longest to understand. It wasn't that she was busy. It's that she had decided I didn't count. There's a difference between somebody who forgets to see you and somebody who has done the math and concluded you are not worth the electricity it takes to look at you. Sloan had done the math. She never once called me by my name, not Addie, not Adeline, never. To my face, it was always mother-in-law, said flat like a job title. Mother-in-law, the guest bathroom has water spots. Mother-in-law, Toby's collar isn't pressed right. Mother-in-law, you're using the good olive oil for cooking again. That's for finishing. She would run a finger along the baseboards when she came home, looking for dust like a drill sergeant. She inspected the house I cleaned for free with the suspicion of a woman who thought she might catch me stealing. When her friends came over, the wine girls, the booked and busy crowd, she'd introduce me like this. Oh, that's Garrett's mother. She helps us out around the house. Helps us out. Like I was a service she'd hired off an app. And those women would give me that little smile, that bless your heart smile, and go right back about to talking about their children's private schools and their husbands' bonuses. And I'd be in the kitchen plating their appetizers, invisible as the air conditioning. You want to know what really gets you, though? It's the small things. It's the cuts so little you feel foolish for bleeding from them, like Christmas. They took the family photo in front of the tree, everybody in matching pajamas. And Sloan handed me the phone and said, "You've got the steady hand, Addie." So I stood behind the camera and I took the picture of my own family. And that photo, that exact photo with me not in it, ended up framed 8 inches tall on the mantle. I dusted that frame every week for a year. A picture of everyone I loved and proof I wasn't in it, sitting right there where I had to look at it. I'm in 0 photos in that house. You'd think a ghost lived there and did the laundry. Meanwhile, Sloan was building her brand online. Lumiere was taking off. And she had this whole persona, hashtag self-made, hashtag girl boss, hashtag she did that. There she'd be on her phone in the kitchen I bought with money she borrowed from me, recording little videos about how she built it all from nothing with her own 2 hands and the grind and the hustle and the discipline from nothing, while the woman who co-signed her nothing was 3 feet away scrubbing her oven. I'd watch her post that and I would just go quiet inside, the way you do when something is too big and too ugly to even have a feeling about yet. Now, I told them I used to work at an accounting firm. That's all I ever said. A desk job at an accounting firm, dear, nothing exciting. And you know what? Not one time in 3 years did Sloan ask me a single follow-up question. Not what kind of accounting, not for how long, not what I did. Because to her, there was nothing back there worth knowing. I was a used-up old woman, a kitchen appliance with a pension. And I let her think that. Lord help me, I leaned into it. Because here is a thing I learned in 40 years of forensic accounting, and you write this one down. The fastest way to make a clever person careless is to convince them you're not a threat. People who think you're nothing will sign things in front of you. They'll talk in front of you. They'll leave the books open on the counter. Because who cares? It's just the help. I didn't know yet that I was going to need any of that. I want to be clear, in those days I wasn't plotting anything. I was just surviving 1 cold cup of coffee at a time, telling myself this was the price of not being alone. The only thing that was real, the only thing that kept me there was the children. Toby would climb into my lap with a chapter book, and we'd read till he fell asleep. Junie called me Gam, couldn't say Grandma, and she'd pat my cheek with her little starfish hand. Those babies loved me with their whole hearts, no agenda, no math. And that, of course, was the one thing Sloan couldn't stand. Because the day Junie looked up at the dinner table, with Sloan sitting right there, and said, "Gam, I love you more than Mommy." Oh, the temperature in that room dropped 20 degrees. That night, I heard them through the wall, Sloan's voice, sharp and low. "Your mother is turning my own children against me, Garrett. She undermines me in my own house. She thinks she's their real mother." And I waited. I lay in that guest bed and I waited for my son, my baby, the boy I sat up with through every fever, to say something. Anything. "She's my mom, knock it off." Just that. 3 words. What I heard instead was silence. Then I heard him say, "Real tired, real small, I'll talk to her, baby. Go to sleep. I'll talk to her." That was the night I understood my own situation, finally, clear-eyed. The way I used to read a fraudulent balance sheet and feel the truth of it click into place. I was not a member of this family. I was an unpaid employee they were too cheap to fire and too polite to evict. And the only person who could have protected me had just rolled over and gone to sleep. I didn't cry. People always expect crying. I just lay there in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, like a woman in a coffin, and somewhere in me, somewhere way down underneath the grief and the loneliness and the 3 years of swallowed pride, something cold and very old and very good at numbers woke all the way up. I'm not going to tell you I had a plan that night. I didn't. Not yet. But I'll tell you what I had. I had 40 years of knowing exactly where people hide things. I had a daughter-in-law who thought I was furniture. And I had a house full of open books that nobody believed I could read. It would be another 8 months before that little text message lit up my phone on the night of her big party. 8 months before I packed that suitcase. But it started here, in the dark, in a guest bedroom in a house I helped pay for, the night my son told his wife he'd talk to me. He never did talk to me, by the way. He never got the chance. Now I have to tell you about that night, the night of the party. It was a Thursday in March, and Sloan had been floating on air for a week because the third Lumiere location was opening. Grand opening, ribbon cutting, the whole circus. She'd rented out the new place and invited everybody who mattered to her, which was a lot of people, and one person who didn't matter to her at all, which was me, except I wasn't invited. I found out the way I found out everything in that house. By accident, by overhearing. They were all getting ready. Garrett in the good shirt I'd ironed that morning, the children in their little outfits, Sloan changing 3 times and asking Garrett, did this make her look established? Or did it make her look like she was trying to look established? And I was at the stove, because where else would I be? And I asked, just casual, just testing the water. What time should I be ready? The room went quiet. You know that quiet. Sloan looked at me like I'd asked to come along on her honeymoon. Oh, she said, mother-in-law, this is an industry thing. Investors, press. It's really a professional event. You'd be bored out of your mind. And then, because she couldn't help herself, because cruelty for her was like cracking her knuckles, she added, besides, somebody's got to hold down the fort. You don't want Biscuit having an accident on the new rug. Biscuit is the dog. So they left at 4 in the afternoon, all of them, perfumed and polished and laughing. And Garrett kissed me on the forehead on his way out without looking at me, the way you'd pat a dog, and the door closed and the house did that thing it does. It got loud with quiet. I made myself dinner. You want to know what the help eats while the family drinks champagne? I'll tell you. I had a can of tomato soup, the cheap kind, the kind they sell 3 for a couple of dollars, and I ate it standing up at the counter, because by then I'd stopped feeling like I had the right to sit at the dining table I'd polished 1,000 times. That's what 3 years does. It doesn't just take your dignity. It convinces you you handed it over willingly, which is worse. And then, God help me, I opened Instagram. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have, the way you know you shouldn't press on a bruise. But I did, and there it all was. Sloan in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, a glass of champagne up by her face, glowing. The caption said something like, 3 years ago I had a dream, and tonight I have an empire. Never let anyone tell you what you can't build. There was Garrett with his arm around her, beaming. There were my grandbabies in their party clothes. There was Sloane's sister Kayla, and a crowd of people I didn't know, all of them toasting, all of them shining, all of them at a table I paid for in a room I co-signed, celebrating a woman who'd built it all from nothing. 190 likes already. Comments pouring in, queen, goals, so inspiring, self-made and stunning. I put the phone face down on the counter. I looked at my tomato soup going cold and forming a skin over the top, and I didn't cry. I want you to understand, I was past crying. I'd cried all my crying out months back, alone, where nobody could see and tell me I was being dramatic. What I felt that night was something flatter and colder and a great deal more dangerous than tears. And that was the exact moment the phone buzzed. A text from Sloan. And I want you to know, what came up on that screen was not meant for me, you could tell. Because she was plainly talking to her sister. Said, can you believe she actually asked to come tonight? I had Garrett tell her it was investors only. Just make sure the help feeds the dog and stays out of the wine. Last thing I need is the old lady getting into my good bottles. She probably can't tell the difference between $100 wine and dish soap anyway. then a laughing emoji. Then, 3 seconds later, sent to the wrong thread, obviously, a second message that just said, "Oh my God, ignore that. Wasn't for you. Wasn't for you." I read it 3 times. The help, the old lady. Can't tell the difference between wine and dish soap. And here is the funny thing, the thing I think about now. She was wrong. I can tell the difference. I spent 40 years being able to tell the difference between things that look the same and aren't. That was my whole career, telling the difference. But she didn't know that, did she? Because she never asked. I typed back one word, "Okay." Then I set the phone down and I walked upstairs to my room, slow, and I opened the closet. Now here's where I have to stop and tell you the part nobody in that house knew. The part Sloan would have given her third location to have known 8 months earlier. I am not a retired secretary. I did not have a little desk job at an accounting firm. My name is Adeline Holloway, and I spent 40 years as a forensic accountant. You know what that is. That's the person they bring in when the numbers are lying. That's the person who sits down with a company's books that have been cooked and dressed up to look like a wedding cake, and finds the body buried underneath. I testified in federal court 11 times. I helped put away a chief financial officer who thought he was the smartest man in Arizona, and a developer who skimmed a retirement fund dry, and a charity director who was very generous with everyone's money but his own. I have spent my entire adult life looking at clever, confident, well-dressed people who were absolutely certain no one could read what they were hiding. I could always read it. So when I reached into the back of that closet, behind the shoe boxes, I didn't just pull out my suitcase. I pulled out an accordion folder, the expandable kind, thick as a phone book, that I'd been quietly filling for 8 months, since the night through the wall. Since I'll talk to her, baby. Because here's what happens when you treat a forensic accountant like furniture. She starts reading the room, and then she starts reading the mail, the mortgage statements that come to the house in her name because she co-signed them, the loan documents left on the kitchen counter, because who cares? It's just the old lady. The bank notices. The emails Sloan left open on the family computer, because it never once occurred to her that the woman cleaning her key knew what a debt service coverage ratio was. I sat down on the edge of the bed with that folder in my lap, and I started turning pages. And I want to walk you through what I'd been looking at for 8 months, because this is the part that changes everything. The first thing you have to understand is the money. My money. I kept a ledger, a real one, a spiral notebook in my own handwriting, every dollar I'd put into Sloan's dream. The $210,000 from the house, of which $140 went straight into the build-out. The $60,000 personal note. And then the part that nobody ever talks about, the slow bleed, the day-to-day. Because I'd been quietly covering things for 3 years. The grocery bill, because Sloan was always tapped out, every dollar reinvested in the brand, she'd say. The children's activities. The time the air conditioning died in July, and somehow it was me who called the repairman, and me who paid him. Little by little, receipt by receipt, I had put more than $241,000 into that family. But the money I'd spent wasn't even the dangerous part. The dangerous part was the paper. Because when Sloan built her empire, she needed those 3 expansion loans. And the bank is not stupid. The bank looked at a med spa owner who was leveraged to her eyeballs, one profitable location and a lot of ambition. And the bank said, "We need a cosigner. We need somebody with assets and a 40-year credit history, clean as a whistle. We need somebody the bank can come after if this thing goes sideways." And that somebody was me. I cosigned all 3 loans. My name is on everyone, which means, and Sloan never thought about this for 1 second, because thinking about it would have meant thinking about me as a real person, that I am not just her mother-in-law. I am legally bound to her debt. Her empire stands on my signature, and there are clauses in those loan agreements, the boring fine print nobody reads, the fine print that happen to be my entire profession, that say a cosigner has rights. Cosigner who formally withdraws and demands the lender protect their position can trip a whole row of dominoes. A cosigner who is also the largest private creditor, the woman holding that $60,000 note, can call that note due. Sloan thought I was furniture. Sloan had built her entire kingdom on top of a load-bearing wall she'd spent 3 years kicking for fun. I sat there on that bed and I felt the whole architecture of it click into place in my head, clean and total, the way a fraud always does, right before I understand it completely. And I'll be honest with you, the first thing I felt wasn't triumph, it was grief. Because I'd have given all of it back, the whole 241,000, every cosigned dollar, to have heard my son say 3 words through that wall. But he didn't, so I picked up the phone and I called the one person I trusted with this, not a relative. People always ask me later, didn't you have family to turn to? And the answer is, the family was the problem. No, I called Peg Doyle. Peg and I came up together. 30 years ago, we were 2 of maybe 4 women doing forensic work in the whole state. And we'd shared depositions and bad hotel coffee and 100 late nights putting white-collar crooks where they belong. Peg went and got her law degree somewhere in there and became the kind of corporate attorney that makes grown chief executives sweat through their suits. She's 70 now and sharper than ever. She picked up on the second ring. Addie, it's almost 10 o'clock. Somebody better be dead or rich. Peg, I said, I need you to look at something for me. And I need you to tell me if I'm seeing it right. There was a pause because Peg has known me 30 years, and she knew the sound of my voice when I'm holding a fraud in my hands. You found something, she said, not a question. I found my own, I told her. I think I've been sitting inside one for 3 years. I walked her through it. The co-signed loans, the personal note, the clauses. It took maybe 20 minutes, and the whole time Peg didn't say one word, which if you know Peg is a miracle. And when I finished, there was this long silence on the line. And then she let out a low whistle. And she said, Addie, honey, listen to me very carefully. You don't have a complaint. You have a kill switch. You're not a creditor with a grievance. You are the foundation that entire company is standing on, and the foundation can walk. The minute you formally withdraw and call that note, you trip the covenants on all 3 loans. The bank freezes her operating accounts pending review, and that whole shiny empire seizes up like an engine with no oil, overnight. And the best part, the part that's going to keep me up tonight, is that it's all yours to do, legally, cleanly. She did this to herself the second she signed your name to her dream. I sat there in the dark. So what do you want to do? Peg said gentler now. Because I'll tell you, kid, in 30 years, I have rarely seen somebody handed a hammer this big. You can scare her. You can break her. You can take the whole thing. And I looked over at the closet, at that open suitcase, at the framed photo I could picture downstairs on the mantle, the one of my whole family with me standing safely outside the frame where they liked me. Peg, I said, I don't want to break her tonight. Tonight I just want to disappear. Tomorrow we'll talk about the hammer. I didn't pack much. That surprised me, honestly. 3 years in that house, and when it came down to it, almost nothing in it was mine. I took my clothes. I took the photo of Walt from the nightstand, the one from our trip to the coast, where he's squinting and laughing at something. I said that I can't remember anymore. I took my Mademoiselle's box, and Walt's wedding ring on its chain, and the quilt my grandmother made, the one Sloan always wanted me to keep in my room because it didn't go with her aesthetic. I took the accordion folder. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the appliances I'd paid for, I left exactly where it was. I wasn't a thief in the night. I was a woman correcting an accounting error, and I only wanted what the ledger said was mine. Then I sat down and I thought about the letter. In the version of this story Sloan probably expected, the old lady leaves a letter full of tears. 3 pages of how could you, after everything I did, I gave you my whole life. Begging, basically. Dressed up as dignity, but begging underneath. The kind of letter that ends with the writer coming home in a week, because she has nowhere else to go and everybody knew it. I didn't write that letter. I'd written it in my head 100 times over 3 years, and that night, I finally understood it was the wrong document. Instead, I took out a clean folder, and into it I put copies, the co-signed loan agreements with my signature flagged, the ledger of what I'd spent, totaled at the bottom, 241,000 and change, the personal note, and one bank notice that I'd already that afternoon, before the party, before I even knew about the text, filed the paperwork to act on. Because here's the thing about me. I don't make threats, I make filings. By the time Sloan read anything, it was already done. On top of the stack, I laid a single sheet of paper, and on it, I wrote one line. See you when the lawyers are present. Love, Mom, your accountant. I set the folder on Garrett's pillow on his side of the bed, where he'd find it. And then I called a car, and I carried my own suitcase down my own staircase one last time, my 67-year-old knees complaining the whole way, and I stood in the front hall and I looked at that house, at the floors I'd mopped, at the mantel and the photo I wasn't in, and I felt, for the first time in 3 years, light, like setting down something you've carried so long you forgot it weighed anything. I locked the door behind me, and for the first time I took the key with me instead of leaving it in the lock for them. The car took me to Ginny Albright's place across town. Ginny and I have been friends 40 years, since our boys were in Cub Scouts together. She lost her Frank a couple of years before I lost my Walt, so she knew. She had the porch light on and a pot of decaf going and a made-up bed in the spare room. And when I came through the door, she didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me and said, "You're home now," and took my coat. That's a 40-year friend. They don't make you explain. But before I tell you about that good night's sleep, the best one I'd had in 3 years, I have to tell you what was happening across town, in the house I'd just left. And I only know it the way I know it, because 3 days later, my grandson Toby showed up at Ginny's door, 10 years old, by himself, having figured out the bus, with his face all swollen from crying, and he told me everything. So let me give it to you the way he gave it to me, because some of this a grandmother should never have to hear from a child. They got home a little after midnight. They were loud, Toby said, happy loud. The grand opening had gone great. The investors were thrilled. Sloan had been the queen of the whole night. Garrett had had a few. Sloan had had more than a few. They came through the door, laughing, kicking off shoes. Sloan saying something about how the man from the fund had practically promised her the next round of money on the spot. And then she stopped, because the living room was wrong, not wrecked, not robbed, wrong. The quilt that always hung over the back of the reading chair was gone. The little sewing box that lived on the side table was gone. And up on the mantel, there was a clean rectangle in the dust where a framed photo used to sit. Because I'd taken Walt's picture but left theirs. Except I'd taken the one good frame, and the gap just sat there like a missing tooth. Sloan said, "Did she rearrange my things again?" Annoyed, still not getting it. Garrett went upstairs. Toby heard him, because Toby was awake. Children are always more awake than you think. He heard his dad open the door to my room, the guest room, and go quiet. The closet was open, empty hangers. The bed made tight the way I always made it, like a hotel, like nobody had ever slept there. No glasses on the nightstand, no Walt photo, no Bible. Just a room with the life lifted clean out of it. "Mom," Garrett said, to an empty room. "Mom." And that's when he saw the folder on his pillow. Toby said his dad sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it, and Toby was watching from the hallway in his pajamas. And he said his dad's face did a thing he'd never seen before. He read the top page, the one line, and then he started turning the pages underneath, faster and faster, and the color just went out of him, like watching someone unplug a lamp. Sloan came up to see what was taking so long, and she read it over his shoulder, and Toby said she made a sound he didn't have a word for. He said it was like the sound Junie made the time she fell off the top of the playground and got the wind knocked out of her. That kind of sound. No air behind it. She grabbed the pages out of Garrett's hands. She read them again. And Toby, 10 years old, sitting on the stairs days later, telling me this. He said, "Gam, Mom kept saying it's not real, but Dad kept saying it is. Sloan, it's all real. Look at the name. Look whose name is on it." Because of course it was real. Every page. My signature on 3 loans, my ledger, my note, and the one filing I'd already made that afternoon, which meant that even as they stood there in that bedroom reading, somewhere a process had already started that neither of them could stop. And here is the part that I think about the most. While they were standing there, Sloane's phone started going off. Toby heard it, that bright little banking app sound, ping, ping, ping. Because it was after midnight now, which meant a new business day had ticked over, which meant the bank's overnight systems had registered the cosigner withdrawal I'd filed, and the covenants tripped, and Lumiere's operating accounts got flagged and frozen pending review. Just like Peg said, overnight. Sloane stood in that bedroom in her $400 red dress, holding the proof that her mother-in-law owned her, and watched her empire's accounts lock up one ping at a time on the little screen in her hand. Toby said as Mom slid down the wall and sat on the floor, and then my grandson told me his dad did something he'd never done. Garrett turned to Sloane, and he wasn't quiet anymore. He wasn't, I'll talk to her anymore, and he said, you sent her a text. Tonight. I saw it at the table. You were laughing. You showed your sister. What did you write? What did you write to my mother? And Sloane didn't answer. And Garrett said, you called her the help. In our house, the woman who paid for our house. You called her the help and you sent her to bed with the dog. And I sat there and I let you. I have sat here and let you for 3 years, Toby said. His mom started crying and saying it was a joke. It wasn't serious. Everybody says things. And his dad just kept shaking his head. And then Junie woke up, my Junie, 6 years old, and came out into the hall, rubbing her eyes, asking where Gam was. Where's Gam? I want Gam. And nobody could answer her. And Junie said that was the worst part, his little sister, standing in the hallway asking for me, and the whole house just full of grown-ups who didn't have an answer. Garrett called me 11 times that night. I know because I counted them in the morning. I'd silenced his number. He texted too. Mom, please. Mom, I didn't know it was this bad. Mom, please just tell me you're safe. Mom, I'm so sorry, please. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I wanted him to suffer, although I won't lie and say there wasn't a sliver of me that did. I didn't answer because I was asleep, deeply, dreamlessly asleep, in Ginny Albright's spare room, in a bed nobody expected anything from me in, with the quilt my grandmother made pulled up to my chin, the best sleep of 3 years. While the house I built held its breath, I slept like a baby. Make of that what you will. The next morning, the war started in earnest, and it started in Peg Doyle's office. I got there at 8 with my accordion folder, and Peg had coffee and a legal pad, and that gleam in her eye she gets. She spread my documents across her big conference table and went through them one at a time, nodding, occasionally saying, occasionally saying, oh, that's good, oh, that's very good, like a woman reading a thriller she already knows ends well. And when she finished, she sat back and said, Addie, this is the cleanest leverage I've seen in years. You could end this today. Withdraw, call the note, let the dominoes finish falling. They'd be ruined inside a month, and there's not a thing they could do. And I almost said yes. I want to be honest about that too. There was a version of me sitting in that chair who wanted to watch it all burn, who'd earned the right to watch it burn. But I said, Peg, before we decide anything, I want to really understand her books, the whole company, not just my piece. I want to know exactly what I'm holding before I squeeze. Peg looked at me a long second and said, spoken like a forensic accountant. Fine, let's read her books. So we did. We didn't need to subpoena anything yet, because as a co-signer, I had a legal right to the financials of the loans I was on the hook for. I requested everything. And for 2 days, I sat in Peg's conference room and I did the thing I did for 40 years. I read. And on the second day, around 3 in the afternoon, I found the body. Because Lumiere wasn't just over-leveraged. Over-leveraged, I expected. Over-leveraged is just ambition that wrote a check it can't cash, and half the businesses in Scottsdale are over-leveraged. No. What I found was worse, and it was the kind of worse I'd spent a career recognizing. The revenue was fake. Not all of it. The smart ones never fake all of it. But Sloane had a third location that wasn't even open, yet showing 11 months of membership revenue on the projections she'd handed to the investment fund. She had client numbers that didn't match the appointment software. She had a signed lease for a fourth location that when I really looked at it, when I held it up to the light the way I'd held up 1,000 forged documents, had a landlord's signature on it that did not match the same landlord's signature on the actual filed lease 3 pages earlier in the very same packet. She had built her pitch to that fund, Meridian Capital, the people who'd practically promised her the next round at the party, on numbers she'd invented and at least one document she'd forged. I sat back in Peg's chair and I took off my reading glasses and I rubbed my eyes and Peg said, "What is it? What'd you find?" And I said, "Peg, she didn't just borrow money she can't pay back. She committed fraud to get it, and I want you to understand what that meant sitting in that room. It meant that the hammer in my hand had just gotten a great deal heavier and a great deal more dangerous, and not because of anything I'd done. I'd come in thinking I held leverage over a daughter-in-law who'd been cruel to me. What I'd actually found was that Sloan had handed me, without knowing it, the power to send her to federal prison. Wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery. The same charges I'd watched bring down men a lot smarter and a lot more careful than her. Outside Peg's window, the mountains were going gold the way they do at the end of an Arizona afternoon, and I sat there holding my daughter-in-law's entire future in a manila folder, and I did not feel powerful. I felt sick. Because somewhere across town, my grandbabies were eating dinner in a house that was about to come down, and the woman who bring it down or hold it up, the woman they'd called the help, was me. Peg set the meeting for the following Monday. Her office, 10 in the morning, and she made it official. A letter on her firm's letterhead requesting the presence of Garrett and Sloan Holloway to discuss matters of debt and liability. Attorneys welcome. Mandatory was the word she used. Peg loves that word. I didn't sleep great the night before, and not for the reasons you'd think. I wasn't nervous. After 40 years, you don't get nervous walking into a room with the truth on your side. What kept me up was the question I still hadn't answered, the one Peg kept circling back to. What do you actually want, Addie? Because the meeting's going to come to a fork, and you need to know which road you're taking before you walk in, not after. I didn't know yet. So I went in not knowing, which is a dangerous way to walk into a room you're supposed to be running. They got there at 9:50. I heard them in the hall before I saw them. And when the door opened, the first thing through it was not the Sloan I knew. The Sloan I knew came at the world in a power suit and heels and a cloud of perfume, chin up, already winning. This Sloan was wearing a plain navy dress, flat shoes, almost no makeup, her hair pulled back simple. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in a weekend. She came in and she would not look at me. She looked at the carpet, at the window, at her own hands, anywhere but at me, and somehow that told me more than anything she could have said. Garrett looked worse, unshaven, eyes sunken red, in a wrinkled shirt. And when he saw me, his face just came apart, but he held it. He held it because his lawyer was there, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else once he understood what was on Peg's table. We sat, Peg at the head, me on one side, the two of them, and their lawyer on the other. And Peg, God love her, did not waste time. I'm going to lay out my client's position, she said, and then we're going to talk about reality. Adeline Holloway is the co-signer on all 3 of your expansion loans. She is also your single largest private creditor. As of last Thursday, she has formally withdrawn her co-signer status and called her note. That is why your accounts are frozen. That is not a threat. It has already happened, and there is no version of the next 90 days in which Lumiere Aesthetics survives in its current form without her cooperation. Are we clear so far? Sloane's lawyer started to say something about good faith, and Peg just slid a single sheet across the table to him, and he read it, and he stopped talking. That's a skill Peg has. We know, Sloane said suddenly. Her voice was wrecked. We already know. We've read it. You don't have to do the whole, she gestured at the papers. You don't have to do this. We know what you have. And then I did the thing I'd come to do, fork in the road or not. I reached into my folder and I took out the Meridian packet, the one with the fake revenue and the forged lease, and I laid it on the table between us, gentle the way you set down something fragile, and I slid it across to her real slow, and I said 4 words. I read your books. Sloane went white, not pale, white, because she knew what was in that packet, and until this exact second, she had believed, the way every fraud believes, that no one else could see it, that she'd been clever, that the numbers told the story she wanted and no one would ever turn them over. Her lawyer leaned in and looked, and I watched him read it, and I watched him get to the second signature, the one that didn't match, and I watched a young attorney realize his client had handed him a problem several pay grades above good faith. He sat back. He didn't say anything either. The fake revenue I could maybe explain to a jury as aggressive projection. I said to her, quiet just to her now. People get away with optimistic. But that, I tapped the forged lease. That's not optimism, Sloane. That's a forged document submitted to a federally regulated lender and an investment fund to obtain money. I have testified in 11 cases. I have watched men far more careful than you go to federal prison for one document exactly like this one. Sloan made that sound again, the no air sound. I spent 40 years reading the books of people who were certain no one could read them, I said. You looked at me for 3 years, and you saw an old woman who couldn't tell wine from dish soap. You never once asked what I did before I came to cook your dinners. And that, more than anything, that's why we're sitting here. Not because you were cruel. People survive cruel. Because you were sure I was nothing, and being sure made you careless, and careless people leave the books open on the counter. The room was dead quiet. Garrett had his head in his hands. And then Peg said the thing that turned the whole meeting, the thing that I think God put in her mouth because I hadn't figured it out myself yet. She said, "Here's what your daughter-in-law hasn't told you, because she's too decent to lead with it. Meridian Capital is already asking questions. We have correspondence. Their diligence team flagged the location revenue 2 weeks ago, and they have opened an internal review. Do you understand what that means? It means this is no longer a private matter between a family. It means that with or without Adeline lifting one finger, this fraud is going to surface. The only question left is whether it surfaces as a controlled correction, handled by someone who knows exactly how to handle it, or as a referral to a prosecutor. And that right there was the part I hadn't even let myself see until Peg said it out loud. Because I'd walked into that room thinking I was holding the detonator, thinking the power was mine, that I got to choose whether the bomb went off. And what Peg had just made plain to the whole table was that the bomb was already lit. Meridian had the match. It was going off regardless. I wasn't the person who could blow it up. I was the only person in that room who could defuse it. 40 years of knowing how to make cooked books look clean enough to survive a federal audit. 40 years of knowing exactly how a fraud unravels and exactly where you have to get ahead of it, and a cosigner's legal standing to actually sit in the driver's seat of the company. There was precisely one person on the planet who had the skill and the legal right and the motive to walk Lumiere back from the edge before Meridian handed it to a prosecutor. It was the help. It was the old lady with the dog. Sloan looked up at me then, finally, for the first time since she walked in, and I watched her do the same math I'd just done. And I watched her understand that her freedom, her actual physical freedom, was sitting in a folder in front of a woman she'd spent 3 years trying to make disappear. She didn't beg. I'll give her that. She just looked at me, and the look was the most honest thing she'd ever shown me. It said, "I know what I did, and I know what you could do, and I have no right to ask you for anything." We took a break. Peg sent the lawyers down to the lobby for coffee, which is a thing lawyers do when the grown-ups need to talk. And it was just the three of us in that room, me and my son and the woman he married. And that's when the rest of it came out. Not the legal part, the human part, the part I'd been missing for 3 years. Garrett spoke first, and he couldn't look at me while he did it. "Mom," he said, "you need to know why I let it happen. Because I've been asking myself for 3 days how I became the man who let his wife call his mother the help and just sat there, and I owe you the real answer." And he told me, 4 years ago, before they ever moved me in, Garrett had put money into a thing, a friend's startup, can't miss, ground floor. He'd put in their savings, and then he'd quietly put in more that wasn't their savings, a home equity line he took out without telling Sloan. And it cratered. All of it. He was 60,000 in the hole and about to lose the house and too ashamed to tell his own wife. And Sloan found out, he said. She found the statements. And I thought that was it. I thought she'd leave me. And instead she covered it. She drained the business account she'd been building for 2 years, the money she'd been saving to expand, and she made the debt go away, and she never once threw it in my face. Not once. He looked at her then, and there was something terrible and tender in it. "So when she started treating you the way she did," Garrett said to me, "I told myself I owed her. I told myself she'd saved me, and I had no right to cross her. And every time I should have stood up for you, I heard this voice that said, 'She rescued you. You don't get to fight her. You owe her your whole life.' And that's not a reason, Mom. I know that now. It's just the rope I tied myself up with so I wouldn't have to be brave. I sat with that. My son, the boy I raised, had been drowning in his own secret shame for 4 years. And he'd let me drown next to him because two drowning people will hold each other under just to stay up. And then Sloane spoke. And this is the part I did not expect, the part that changed how I saw all of it. She said, "Can I tell you something about my mother?" "Her name is Darla," Sloane said. "She cleaned houses for 31 years. Rich people's houses here in Scottsdale, the kind of houses with the mountain views. And when I was a girl, I used to go with her sometimes in the summer, and I would sit on the marble floors of these enormous cold houses while my mother scrubbed them, and I watched how those women talked to her, like she was furniture, like she was part of the appliance package. One of them," Sloane's voice cracked, "one of them once handed my mother a list and called her the girl. The girl will handle it." And my mother was 44 years old. "And I swore," Sloane said. "I swore I would get out. I would claw my way up so high that no one would ever look at me the way they looked at her. I built Lumiere out of that. The hashtags, the empire, the red dress, all of it, it was all just a little girl on a marble floor trying to never be the help again. And then you came to live with us," she said, and she finally looked right at me and let me see her whole ruined face. And I had money and a business and a beautiful house, everything I swore I'd get. And the first thing I did with it, the very first thing, was find a woman in my own home and turn her into my mother. I did to you exactly what I watched them do to her. I became the thing I hated so much I built my whole life to escape it, and I didn't even see myself doing it. I called you the help, and somewhere in this city, my mother is still cleaning houses. And I was so ashamed of where I came from that I turned around and recreated it with you on the marble floor. Nobody said anything for a long time, and I want to tell you, sitting there, that all the cold satisfaction I'd carried into that room, the hammer, the leverage, the 40 years of being right, it didn't go away exactly, but it got quiet. Because you cannot watch a person finally see themselves all the way down to the bottom and keep wanting to break them. I'm not built that way. Maybe you are, and maybe that's smarter. But I looked at this woman who'd been so cruel to me, and underneath the cruelty, I finally saw what was actually there, which was a frightened little girl who'd spent her whole life running from a marble floor and had run in a perfect circle right back onto it. It didn't excuse one single thing she'd done. I want to be clear about that because I think people hear a story like this and want the sad backstory to wipe the slate. It doesn't. Understanding why someone hurt you is not the same as deciding it didn't happen, but it changes what you do next. Then Peg knocked and came back in, and her face was different, tighter, and she said, "Addie, I need to tell you all something, and you're not going to like the timeline. Meridian's review is moving faster than I thought. I just got off the phone. They're talking to counsel about whether to make a referral. And here's the thing nobody at this table has said out loud yet. Garrett, your name is on the household finances. The children's education accounts are tangled into the business collateral. If this goes to a prosecutor and the company collapses uncontrolled, it does not stop at Sloane. It takes Garrett. It takes the house. It takes whatever is in those children's accounts." And there it was, the last wall coming down, the thing that turned my hammer into a question I actually had to answer because I could still walk away. Withdraw, let it fall, let Meridian hand it all to a prosecutor, and I would be completely within my rights, and Sloane would get exactly what she'd earned. But the bomb wasn't aimed at Sloane anymore. It was aimed at my son, and at Toby, who'd figured out the bus to come find me, and at Junie, standing in a hallway at midnight asking where her gam was. I'd spent 3 years being told I wasn't really family, and now the only way to save the family was to admit to myself in that room that they were mine anyway, that they had always been mine, that love doesn't actually wait around to find out if it's deserved. I reached over and I pulled the Meridian folder back across the table, back to my side, and everybody watched me do it. "I need the night to think," I said. "Nobody talks to Meridian until I do. Peg, can you hold them off 24 hours? Peg looked at me a second and said, "I can hold anybody off 24 hours. And then, because she's my oldest friend and she's earned the right, she said, Low, just for me. You already know what you're going to do, Addie. You knew the second I said the children's accounts. You've known since you read the books that you weren't going to be able to let it burn. I didn't answer her, but she wasn't wrong. I didn't sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of awake, not the dread kind, the deciding kind. I sat up in Ginny's spare room, with the quilt around my shoulders and a yellow legal pad, and I did what I've always done when a thing is too big to feel my way through. I made it a problem with numbers. Because numbers don't lie to you, and they don't beg, and they don't call you the help. And by about 4 in the morning, with the desert going that deep blue it goes right before the light, I had my answer written out in 3 columns, and it was the same answer Peg had seen in my face 12 hours earlier. I came into Peg's office the next morning, and I told her how it was going to go, and she wrote it all up, and 2 days later we were back at that conference table, all of us. And this time I was the one who ran the meeting. I'm not going to destroy you, I said. I want to say that first, because I want you both sitting in your own bodies while I lay this out, not bracing for the worst. I'm not calling the prosecutor. I'm not letting it burn. I watched the air come back into both of them, and I held up a hand because I wasn't done. But understand what I am doing, because it is not mercy, and it is not me forgetting. Here is what happens. Meridian's review surfaces. That's already in motion, can't be stopped. So we get ahead of it. I am going to take operational control of Lumiere's finances. Not a title on a wall, real control, signing authority, books open to me at all times. I have spent 40 years walking companies back from exactly this ledge, and I know precisely how to restructure this debt and how to sit down across from Meridian's people and turn a fraud referral into a negotiated correction. I'm not putting in another dollar. I want that clear. I'm not bailing you out with money. I'm bailing you out with the one thing you decided I didn't have, which is what's between my ears. I slid the agreement across to them. Peg had it drawn up clean. You restructure. You operate under my financial oversight for 3 years. Every number that goes to a lender or an investor crosses my desk first. The fake location comes off the books. We eat that loss honestly, and we rebuild what's actually there, which, for what it's worth, Sloan, is a real business underneath all the lying. You built something real. You just got scared it wasn't enough and started painting on top of it. We stopped painting. Sloan was crying but quiet, nodding. And then I said the part that mattered more than the money. There are 2 conditions that aren't financial, and they aren't negotiable. The first one is Garrett. You and I said to my son, are going to therapy. Just the 2 of us, no Sloan, once a week, for as long as it takes, and I'll pay for the first 10 sessions because I want you to know I'm choosing this, and you'll pay for the rest because I want you to know it costs you something. We are going to figure out how the boy I raised to be brave learned to go quiet, and we are going to fix it before you teach it to Toby. Garrett couldn't speak. He just nodded, and the tears came, and he reached across and put his hand over mine on the table, and I let him. And the second condition, I said, and I turned to Sloan. The second condition is your mother. She looked up scared, because the Darla was the one thing she'd kept hidden from her whole shiny life. I want Darla at Sunday dinner, I said, every Sunday, at your table, in your house, in the seat of honor, introduced to every booked and busy friend you've got as your mother, who cleaned houses for 31 years so you could have everything you have. Not hidden. Not the woman you mention vaguely if anyone asks. Your mother. Because you have spent your whole life so ashamed of where you came from that you turned around and did to me what was done to her. And the only way I know to break that, the only way, is for you to stop being ashamed of the marble floor. The woman who scrubbed it is the reason you can afford one. You honor her out loud in front of everyone, and you do it until it stops being hard. Sloan put her face in her hands, and she cried like something was finally draining out of her that had been poisoning her for 30 years. I'm not going to tell you it was clean after that. I told you at the start I wasn't going to lie to you, and the truth is the clean version is the one nobody believes because nobody's ever lived it. We didn't all hug and become a greeting card. Real repair has scars in it, and ours did too. I did not move back into that house. People are always surprised by that. They want the ending where the grandmother comes home and the family closes around her warm and whole. But I'd learned something on Ginny's spare bed that I wasn't going to unlearn for anybody's happy ending. I'd learned what it felt like to wake up somewhere that didn't want anything from me, and I wasn't giving that back. So I took a little two-bedroom apartment over in the Arts District with good light in the morning and a balcony just big enough for two chairs, and I made it mine, every inch of it. The first thing in 3 years that was only mine. The forgiveness came slow, and it came uneven, which is the only way it ever really comes. With Garrett, it came through those therapy chairs, hour after hour, the two of us learning out loud what we'd never said. He'd show up sometimes just to sit with me and not even talk, the way he used to when he was a boy, and something was too big for words, and those were the visits that healed the most. With Sloane, it came the way I told her it would have to, earned, in actions over time. And I'll tell you, she did the work. The first Sunday, Darla came to dinner. Sloane was so nervous her hands shook, and she stood up in front of a table of her glossy friends, and she said, "I want you all to meet my mother, Darla." And her voice broke on the word mother. And Darla, this tiny, tough woman with a cleaning lady's strong hands, she just beamed like the sun coming up. By the third Sunday, it wasn't hard anymore. By the 10th, Sloane was bragging about her. "My mom raised 3 kids cleaning houses. Can you believe the discipline of that?" And the booked and busy crowd, half of them got quiet and thoughtful, and a couple of them, I noticed, started looking at their own help a little differently. Funny how that spreads. Lumiere survived. We pulled it back from the ledge inch by honest inch, and it turns out a business built on something real. Even when the owner panicked and started lying on top of it, a business like that can be saved if somebody who knows the books gets there in time. Meridian, once they saw the correction was being handled by an actual professional who knew exactly what she was doing, took the negotiated path. No referral, no prosecutor. Sloane kept her freedom, which she has never once stopped knowing she owes to the woman she called the help. And here is the thing I found out months later that put the last piece in. Remember I told you Peg said the children's education accounts were tangled into the collateral. What I never told Sloane and Garrett, what I'd been doing quietly for 3 years, even while they treated me like nothing, is that I'd been putting money into those accounts myself. Every month, a little forensic accountant's habit, taking care of the future even when the present is breaking your heart. Toby and Junie have college because of a grandmother they were told was a freeloader. When Sloane found that out, she came to my apartment and she sat on my couch and she couldn't even speak. She just held onto my hand and shook because she finally understood all the way down that the woman she'd tried to erase had been the one quietly making sure her children would be okay the whole entire time. That's the part that broke her open for good, I think. Not the hammer, the college accounts. These days, it's been a little over a year. I'm 67. I teach a bookkeeping class for women starting their own little businesses down at the community center on Tuesdays because it turns out 40 years of reading the books is worth handing on. I walk every morning with Ginny. Garrett comes by every Sunday, sometimes with the children, sometimes just him and a coffee, and we cook together like when he was small. Darla and I have gotten close, two women who scrubbed other people's floors in our own ways, and she calls me her sister now. And Sloane texts me little things, a recipe, a photo of the children, once just a message that said, "I see you, Addie. I'm sorry it took me so long. I see you." Last week, Junie gave me a drawing. It's me, standing in front of a door with a little suitcase in my hand, and I've got a great big smile. And underneath, in her wobbly 6-year-old letters, she wrote, "My Gam Addie, the woman who could read everybody's secrets, even her own." I had it framed. It sits on my mantle now in my apartment in the good morning light, and I'm in this one. I made sure I'm in this one. People think the bravest thing I ever did was leave that night. It wasn't. The bravest thing was admitting I had taught them how to treat me. Every meal I served without a thank you, every insult I swallowed to keep the peace, I called it love. It wasn't love. It was fear wearing love's coat. I spent 40 years balancing other people's books, and somehow never noticed the one account bleeding red was my own dignity. So here is what I know now at 67. Respect is not something you wait to be handed like leftovers from somebody else's table. It is a line on your own ledger, and you do not let anyone, not your son, not a stranger, not the people you love most, write it off as worthless. I left so they could finally see me, but the one who most needed to see me all along was me.